Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Talking TSR. I'm Rick Maffei. Unfortunately, Crystal cannot join us tonight as he is currently wending his way back from the wilds at his origins. However, I'm fortunate in that I have a co-host in the very talented Mike Ferguson. Hopefully, Mike's a known name to you folks. He's written many products for Goodman Games. He's done RPG work for other publishers. I think, has got a great knowledge of these old books that we love so much. So he was just such a perfect fit to put in here. Plus you don't have to listen to me talk alone for an hour, which is probably the equivalent of, I don't know, the rack and thumb screws. So thank you for joining us as co-host tonight, Mike. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. It's my pleasure to be here. It's fun. I will say I am a fan, I guess, of sorts of the show. Watch it. I can't say I always watch it on Twitch, but I certainly catch a lot of the YouTube ones, particularly Dwellers of the Forbidden City. I had to watch that one because my personal favorite. Much like Chris, much like Rick, I'm originally from Jersey, Goodman Games East, as we once affectionately called it. I'm now in the wilds of Eastern Pennsylvania, but we share a lot of common background down to the fact that Chris and I probably bought modules at the same Tiny Tots in Greenbrook, New Jersey around the same time. So I'm sure I elbowed him out of the way at some point in like 1982 for a copy of like Hidden Shrine or something like that.
There you go. More and more I'm finding are how the various people are paths crossed at different points. And I should know for the folks there too that Mike is currently DMing me through the Lost City. I'm a player in Mike's campaign, and I had purposely never read the Lost City. I'd always held out on the Lost City reading it. So it was like the one module I always put aside for someday to go through a player completely, completely in the dark. And Mike's currently pulling me through that. Finally, it's finally realized, it's finally happening, and that's been a delight. So I want to thank you for that too, Mike, because that's just such a fun experience. All right, but let's get down to business here. Let's see, general announcements really quick. Original Adventures Reincarnated #7, The Dark Tower, is pretty much approaching its last 48 hours on Kickstarter. We're hitting like the last 2 days, folks. Yeah. So if you haven't checked it out already, check it out. Talk about a Mondo adventure. It's like 3 books in a slipcase. I thought the Temple of Elemental Evil was exhausting when I worked on that. This thing is enormous. You'll need to reinforce your bookshelf, I think, if you purchase this. The Dark Tower was, I believe, the only non-TSR adventure to be listed on Dungeon Magazine's top 30. Yeah. So definitely worth checking out. But for tonight's discussion, we are going to delve into certainly an older classic module, C2, the Ghost Tower of the Inverness. So Mike, when we start with you, why don't you give me your kind of like top level thoughts about the module? What comes to mind?
Certainly Funhouse dungeon for sure. If you're looking for dungeon ecology, if you're looking for internal consistent logic for a dungeon, throw it away. This is not that dungeon. This is a lot of puzzles, a lot of challenging encounters. And I should stress, for me, this works because it was originally designed as a tournament module. So keep that in mind. It's more about challenging the players. When I originally read this long ago, one of the things that did strike me was, I have to say, I think it's a little more thought of what the players actually do, maybe because it's a tournament module. And in that, more than like a Gygax Tomb of Horrors kind of thing, where the logic is you can't do certain things. This is more, you can't do certain things, and then follows up. And then if your players try to do the next logical step, here's what they can do. Here's a little more. So I always found that interesting, as it's more anticipatory, if that's a word, of what's next. What do you think the players are going to do? And I really appreciated that. And that was the first time I'd ever read that kind of in a module, or like, oh, you're actually trying to think of what the players might do when they hit a wall, literally or figuratively.
That's very true, because I remember when we kind of went through Bone Hill, we hit that style of writing, where it was, and I think that's a great word for it, a sort of anticipatory writing. Certainly, yeah, Funhouse style module all the way. As folks watching know, I have a mixed relationship with
Mhm.
Funhouse modules, though as I get older, I'm starting to warm up to them. Definitely strikes me like another kind of sister module to White Plume Mountain. Like you said, no verisimilitude, dungeon
Yeah.
ecology. Whoop.
Yeah.
It's every room kind of, yeah, every room's kind of locked into its own little microcosm of being a puzzle that the players have to just get through that room to the next point. I mean, again, I think as I get older, I am starting to appreciate these modules more. It's funny how it flows, and we talked about this a little bit before the show started, kind of in the green room, about how you change your mind and you approach things a little differently, I think, as you get
Yeah.
older and you play longer, because I think I started out really loving these kind of modules like this in White Plume Mountain when I was very young, when I just started playing in my early teens. And then later I got into more that realism mode, where verisimilitude was more important, and ecology, and who's feeding who, and where the bad guys can arm up and suit up and feed, and everything. And now I'm starting to realize that sometimes having a good time is fun too. And it's perfectly
Yeah.
like to have that puzzle room, because even like when putting me through Lost City, there's been some rooms that are more puzzly sort of rooms, and I'm really enjoying them as a player. So I'm it's finally getting through my head that that's got a place too.
Yeah,
um
I think that's it. There's different flavors to it all,
yeah.
and this like goes more to like the Gonzo side of it, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean,
um
sometimes, and particularly if you particularly if you survive, because
yeah.
I think that's part of this. Part of it's kind of like anybody who's gone through Tomb of Horrors. You like saying not necessarily that you made it to a Sararak, but how
Hmm.
far did you get? Oh, I made it
Yeah.
all the way up to this encounter.
Yeah,
This is
because
kind
it
of the
can
same
be
thing.
tough. It can
Yeah.
be a tough module.
Oh, this one's brutal at
Yeah.
times. Like, I'm
and
not gonna
and
lie.
the last room can be an absolute death trap. And it certainly, it feels like what it is. It feels like a translation of a tournament module, and an early one, so it's a product of its time.
Right.
I think the tournament in this case was, WinterCon 8 in 1979. So
Yeah.
this one is it's an early one. So I think we kind of have to put that into account. This module was written by Alan Hammock. Alan did a lot of things for TSR. He did a bunch of Boot Hill stuff. He did
One
a
of the
lot of
slave
work in the
lords, I think.
Slave
Yeah.
Lord series.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And you can feel similarities between this module and some stuff he's done in the Slave Lords, or I do. I recognize a kind of similarity in encounters. You can almost tell what he did,
Yeah.
in there. Let's see what else. Oh, some folks in the comments on YouTube have asked us to kind of throw out a little plot summary. So, super nutshell plot summary for this, for those not familiar with it. Again, it's called the Ghost Tower of Inverness. Inverness was a castle fortress of a great wizard named Galapdidril, and the castle fortress was built to house his prized possession, which is the soul gem, which I believe was created from a falling meteorite or something, if I'm
Yeah.
remembering.
Yeah, that's correct.
And this soul gem was known that it could steal the life from any creature. And this fortress, between the strength of the soul gem and the strength of the magical protections on the fortress itself, it was pretty much impenetrable. But eventually, like a lot of these wizards seem to do, Galapdidril vanished, and then Inverness eventually was seized, and the tower was destroyed. And now the seer of Ernest, who seems to have, or Ernst, depending on how you pronounce it, he seems to have a suspicious familiarity with the soul gem and wants to get his hands on it. And he went to the ruins and tried to get his hands on it, was sort of rebuffed by the monsters. So now the seer of Ernst and the Duke of Ernst are sort of giving you an offer you can't refuse,
Right.
because most of the, at least tournament characters, are basically right on the line for dungeon sentences for the rest of their lives, most of them.
Yeah.
So the Duke is offering you a sort of Suicide Squad mission, that if you can go and
Yeah.
get this soul
Choo
gem.
choo. Yeah. This is
You're
total
right.
railroad. I
Yeah.
mean,
So it's Railroad City, which a lot of these older ones, I mean, even G1, the Hill Giants, if you remember that one, it was
oh
kind of
God, yeah.
it was like, go get the Hill Giants or you'll be put to the axe. So even Gygax pulled that off occasionally. And as I mentioned in the Ernst, and the fact that like this module is set in the Alboraus, Very strong connections to Greyhawk here,
Oh
not
yeah.
just like name calling, but they kind of mentioned some history elements like the twin cataclysms and things, which I found interesting. So this one very firmly rooted in Greyhawk. I know years later they redid this for 3.5 or something, and then I believe they moved it out of Greyhawk into a sort of generic. Wizards made the call to move it out of Greyhawk, like they did so many things. But this original version was solidly in Greyhawk. I think the original tournament version, instead of calling him the Duke of Ernst, he was just called the Emperor, so it was a little more generic. But I think even that was considered in
Yeah.
Greyhawk, I believe.
I want to say, and I may be getting the timeline wrong, but I also think this is probably coming out around the time the Greyhawk box set was coming out too. So I think there's a lot more emphasis on we got to tie all this stuff
Yeah,
together.
maybe a little,
so,
right? Yeah, a little
yeah.
cross promotion. That's true. I didn't even think about that, and I think you're right. I think they're right around the same time period. So
Yeah, because I think you start seeing that like around again, like Forbidden City, this one. There's a few others where all of a sudden it's really like specifying or calling out much more of the Greyhawk elements that you become familiar with, or more explicit about it. So
true. I mean, I like Greyhawk. I've always been a Greyhawk guy to some degree. So I love that. But yeah, it's definitely a telling element in some of these really older modules that, hit the late 70s kind of thing.
Yeah.
So what other elements do you find noteworthy in this?
I mean, I think you and Chris talked about this with Hidden Shrine, but one of the things that popped out for me is the tournament rules and the tournament point system they put in there, which this is like, again, 12-year-old me got this out of the shrink wrap and started reading through this, and Gen Con was like this mythical magic place, like that I had no hope of ever going to, as far as I was concerned. And you're reading, oh, there's tournament. Oh, and the point system was like, it almost went into like, how tough is a certain situation besides experience points? I mean, I was used to treasure and killing monsters equates to experience, but now you're like judging like puzzles. How tough are they? And you could kind of even just look at the points and go, is this a hard one? Is this easy? What are they putting into play here? And one of the call outs in the beginning of the module that I like is it explicitly says, and I've never remembered seeing that in a module before, we are testing how good the players are. Like, it flat out says we're testing, skilled players, experienced players, and it's saying these puzzles in here are to challenge you. And for the most part, I find some of the puzzles, most are pretty good. I have a couple quibbles with some of them. I can see how a group of players goes in and hits a wall, and I'm not quite sure how they get around it, particularly in a tournament style of play. The module does a very good anticipation of what players might do, but yeah, there is a level to it where you go, so what if they don't figure that out?
Yeah.
But I still think, again, a product of 1979, it's really well done.
Yeah. And that's something we mentioned that, but it's like obviously something we should always take into account, because I think it's so easy to look at these through a jaded lens. And forget that a lot of the folks writing these, they were winging these things to some extent, where they didn't have a whole lot of examples and forget other companies doing modules. It didn't happen. So there, a lot of these things, it was the first time they were doing a lot of these things. So
and I'll be honest, one of the first, you mentioned I've worked a while ago on Goodman Games products. One of the first things I worked on was Chris recruited me to do Crypt of the Devil Lich. And part of his pitch was, we're going to out Tuma Horrors. But as I got like documents of, and this is how the tournament's set up, I kept like the toughness of Tuma Horrors in mind. But that was probably the first time I had dug out this module in a while I was working on it, because I was thinking, Yeah, tough like Tomb of Horrors, but this has the tournament structure, and I wanted just to see how that worked. Now, I made my own tweaks to it, and we all did,
Mhm.
and it's ours was, I think, more modernized. We had the benefit of looking back at how they did modules like this and going, we can
Yeah,
do it better.
yeah,
But we needed the pioneers to do it, and this is like
yeah,
one of the pioneers.
yeah. No, these guys climbed the mountain and kind of established the path, the base
Yeah.
camps. We've got a comment. I'm going to mispronounce this name from Skywhirl. I'm going to say. So, what are some of your tips for helping the game be fun when players get stuck on puzzles? Riffing on what Mike just said, I mean, one thing I would say is as a DM, go through and try to look for sticking points, I would say, and maybe even offer extra solutions. Like if a key can only be recovered from one location, it's totally cool to, from my standpoint as a game master to go in and, plant an extra key someplace else. If you read through it and you think it's particularly hard,
Yeah.
that's would be my advice. Put yourself in the mindset of the players, because I think as a DM, when you know the answer to these puzzles, they seem pretty easy. But I know for a fact for myself at the table, when you're on the player side, it's another whole enchilada. So, uh,
Yeah. I can say for myself too, like I've run as a DM old modules, and you'll find something like there's a secret door and you can't proceed unless they find the secret door. I
yeah.
mean, quite honestly, I'll be candid with Rick, who's in my Lost City campaign. Technically, there were a few rooms like that,
Oh, I'm
and
sure.
and what I tend to do is make obscure the door, make it
Mhm.
tough to find,
Yeah.
but don't make it, if you don't, like, in the old days, if you don't roll that one on a d6,
Yeah.
nobody finds it.
Yeah.
No, that's not fair. I mean,
And
I just don't look at it that way. I mean,
no,
I
well,
look at it as it should be hard, but not impossible.
right, because we're looking, it's funny, and this is strictly my opinion, like where I come from on these things, but the older I get, I'm kind of realizing as a DM that, it's about making memories, it's about having fun at the table,
Exactly.
and having your players slam into a brick wall isn't fun. And by and large, as far as the game element goes, we sort of know the players are going to win, and that the players will likely accomplish their objective. They will likely beat the bad guy. Maybe they'll suffer a death or something, but by and large, they will get intact to the end room and get the treasure and, do what they came out to do. So since we kind of know ahead of time that the players are going to win the game, so to speak, to me, it's just about setting that right challenge. So it's more like going down rapids in a boat. They expect they're going to survive and get down to the rapids, but we want to give them some nice big exciting waves and,
Yeah.
and kind of, make it an interesting path, a fun experience, make the, going from A to B. We know they're going to get to B, so make it from going from A to B as fun as possible. And it's not fun if you hit a brick wall. So you just, one way or the other, the players, Chris and I always talk about, when you write like a clue module or mystery module, put like 3 times as many clues in there as you think the players are possibly going to need, because the chances are the players are not going to find all these clues. They're not going to. My players, they're lucky they find 50% of the treasure I plant in rooms. So,
Yep.
you always have to assume the players are going to miss stuff, and it's no fault to the players. It's just the way it is. I think, when you don't have all the information and you're going in, you're not going to find everything.
Yeah. I would just say to that too. It's like, go through the module in advance as best as you can, and look for those choke points of, if they don't do this, it's going to be a log jam and you
Yeah,
can't proceed. And you
yeah,
just need to identify that. And then it's going to be a matter of, do you think out in advance how you're going to work around that, or are you going to improv around that? But that's really the key to it, I think,
yeah,
is you cannot just have like these choke points where everything stops because
yeah,
somebody had a bad roll.
yeah. I mean, narratively, it sounds really cool to have these like you would say choke points, but in practice, it's not a good
No.
thing.
And sitting there watching players just be frustrated is no fun.
Yeah, and I think we've all had that, right? Experience as a DM where you sit there and this puzzle you thought was going to be a 15-minute thing, your players end up sitting at the table for 45 minutes, where finally you realize, hey, I've got to give them a little help. I've got to steer them a little bit, or, have a little divine intervention. Sometimes I'll just have my players, I'll give them an insight roll and then give them a clue or some, handle it in some way like that. So monsters, what do we have? I think, is the Firebat the only new one in this one?
Firebat's the only new one, but man, that's a doozy. Like,
What do you think
like
of the
it.
Firebat?
It's funny. I went back and remember, it's like, oh yeah, the Firebats. And then I was actually just reading like the stat block and the whole thing for them. I'm like, these are nasty because they don't have a lot of hit points. We're talking first edition, armor class 8. So pretty much for the level you're at, you bash them, they die. But they come in swarms. So there's tons of them. And then the bite damage is ongoing. So they bite you with the fiery bite and it lasts for 3 rounds. And it's a 2d4. So even if you take 3 points the first round, it's really 9. So, I mean, and like that adds up. And when you just have tons of them flying around like you have in this module, it's like, oof, get your area effect spell ready because this is nasty. And Fireball doesn't work on them. So good luck.
Right. Yeah. No blasting them out of the sky. And I agree, Trom 13. That I love that Aerolotus illustration for the Firebat.
Oh, perfect.
We have 2 different illustrations for the Firebats in here. One, Jeff D did the one right by the stat block, and then you've got, of course, the one by Errol just knocks it out of the park. Which I guess kind of gets us onto the art. Good mix of art in here. We've got a lot of a whole bunch of Jeff D, LaForce, of course, Aerolotus, as we just mentioned. Jim Rosloff has got a couple pieces in here, and then there's 1 or 2 I can't even identify. Like, I'm sort of think I know who did them, but I'm not. There's 1 or 2 like the Medusa that I'm not 100% a lock on who did it. The style looks familiar for the Medusa, but I'm not seeing an insignia on that one, so I don't know. But I love the mix of art. A lot of small art pieces, but I think we got a good range of art in this module. It's really
it pains me to say this as a writer, but as the kid buying this in Tiny Tots with all the shrink wrapped modules, art was everything. And I think this is one of the things that popped off for this one. Not only the front, but the back cover. The back cover with the fire giant is just like beautiful. I love that one.
Jeff D does some really cool stuff. I love that back cover. I love, probably one of my favorite illustrations, again, Jeff D, in this one is the Umber Hulk, where he's got an Umber Hulk next to somebody, and it's one of the coolest representations of an Umber Hulk that I've seen in any TSR product to date, or any game product to date for that matter. And Aerolotus squeaked that one in too, so you have double duty on the Umber Hulks. But I have to be honest, that Jeff D Umber Hulk is my favorite. I just think it's so cool. But yeah, nice mix. Rosloff's images too are very contrasty, very I know they're all black and white, but his look like they're really made to be in black and white, like the illustration of the guys with the metal key. It's just really cool, some of his.
The Bugbear one I like too, and that one I'm not sure who really did that one either off the top of my head.
Is that the one with the Bugbear kind of clocking that guy?
Yeah, he's got the mace in his hand and he's just like pounding somebody. Yeah,
I think that's Rosloff. I want to say Rosloff, but don't.
I would guess that, but again, that's another one that doesn't have I don't see a credit on it. So.
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that looks like his style. But I'm not, he doesn't have that style like D or Aerolotus where I instantly recognize it. But yeah, just a cool mix of things in here. And like we touched on before too, like it's a dangerous module, like the monsters are put out some real damage, for the edition this was in.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what else? Any other last thoughts maybe before we kind of start looking at our encounter areas?
No, I mean, to me, one of the things that stood out for it, as I said, is part of it is just with those more written, detailed, this is what the players might do in the room. This is what, like the first thing they can do. This is like a follow-up thing they might try to do next. And if they do, this is what happens. To me, this is like when you start seeing like the evolution from you can't do this to more like an improv style of yes and, more that kind of, if anybody's done improv, it's like you can never say no.
Yeah.
It's always yes and you have to build on top of what came next.
Yeah.
This does have a level of no in it, don't get me wrong, but it's also really trying to, for a bonkers, not really logical module, it has a lot of logic of this is how each individual room works, rather than as a whole, there's no logic, but like at each encounter you find has a very specific internal logic that I admire.
It lays out these fantastical situations, but then it adheres to me, which all good fiction does, kind of like it adheres to that logic.
Right.
Or at least as much logic you can have in a game with giant, flying lizards belching fire.
Right.
So yeah, no, I agree. And it's definitely, you can feel that evolution of writing away from the Gygaxian, you can do this and this and this affects this creature and nothing else. If you don't have these 3 spells, you're up the creek.
Yeah, if you didn't memorize these 2 spells that day, you are in big trouble. Right.
And maybe the first kind of pass of the writing started out as a lot more tips for the tournament judges, but whatever, it ended up in the final product. And like you said, you're seeing that even in 1979, or 1980, I should say, when it
came out,
1980, right? The one, we think of, the red cover version coming out in 1980, you see that evolution. I wish I had the green cover one, right? I think there's only like 300 of them or something.
I know.
I want to say 300, I think, were printed. So yeah, it'd be nice.
It'd be nice. Anybody want to give me one? Go ahead. I won't.
Yes, by all means, send it to care of Talking TSR.
Yeah.
All right. So why don't we jump into our top 5 encounters? I'll start the ball rolling with an honorable mention. Though I'm going to be totally honest with our audience and everyone in that I struggled with this one. It's not my, I think this module's fine. It's not a standout favorite of mine. And I found myself, for all the encounter areas, struggling to find ones I really liked. So in some cases, I simply made a choice because I like the monster selection or this or that, as opposed to the grand scheme of the puzzle or something. Because I found some of the puzzles a little arbitrary or just a little, I don't know, things that the players didn't have a lot of control over, like they just kind of walk in and something appears and they have to fight it. So I'll put that caveat out there. But anyway, a quick honorable mention. I'm going to throw out Area 10, the tunnel room with the Umber Hulk, simply because I don't, there was a couple monster uses in this module that I like, because they're creatures that don't get enough love. And I think Umber Hulk is one of them. It's kind of like when I saw the Umber Hulk in the level 3 of the Temple of Elemental Evil, I remember being delighted that it was in there. And same thing here. Whenever an Umber Hulk shows up, for me, it's never a bad thing. It's just screams classic D&D. So even though the really in the encounter, the puzzle of the encounter is more dealing with the Umber Hulk's abilities, I'm going to throw out my honorable mention for the tunnel room Umber Hulk. Do you have an honorable mention, or you want to just launch into your number 5?
I have actually 2 honorable mentions that I'll make really quick.
Yeah.
And then I can go into my number 5.
Yeah,
as well.
No rush.
My honorable mentions are in Area 19. 3 pteranodons are on a spiral staircase. Of course they are. We just have dinosaurs hanging out in a spiral staircase. Why not?
Why not?
Sure. I just love that. There's nothing else about that to that encounter, but I'm just like, really? That's the flying thing that's in there. Okay. Sure. And then quite honestly, my other one is 22, the Medusa is my honorable mention. Mostly because I think it's a pretty straight up encounter with the Medusa, but the flavor text to it is interesting because I think it throws you off because she's singing. Yeah. And it even does this whole big thing, which is like the red flag in the flavor text. The music is very beautiful, but does not sound bewitching. Yeah. So I imagine players doing all sorts of stuff with sound of, silence 15-foot radius or something like that. and that's not the problem. The thing's going to turn around and look at you. But I found like the switch up there kind of neat. So
I had actually the Medusa on my list originally, and I moved her off for whatever reason, but I had her on strictly for the reasons you described. The whole setup, and then this, at least I envision it in my head as a DM of the players walking in and her sort of throwing back her cowl and kind of turning, and
yeah,
the players getting that reaction. To me, the setup's so great there, and the
yeah,
description, that again, it's really just an encounter with Medusa, but the way it's done with her in the garden, the music, like you said, and everything, it's such a wonderful setup that yeah, it's actually one of my more favorite encounters in this.
yeah. And that's actually going to be like an ongoing theme with this the
Mhm.
encounters I have, which is one of the reasons I really like this module, period, is most of the encounters, like I said, do they interconnect well? Some of them do, some of them don't. But it's really good at throwing you off your game of
Yeah.
just the way the description is. It makes players doubt themselves or what's really
Mhm.
going on here.
Yeah.
And to that regard, my number 5 is Area 9, the Crystal Pedestal.
Mhm.
So part of it I don't like because it's basically there's 4 unknown monsters in a crystal ball, and then there's 4 words that are just written Ixam, Pentuko, Merg, like whatever.
Mhm.
And you're left with what is going on here?
Yeah.
Like, and that's the piece of it I do like.
Mhm.
And one of the things I like is comprehend languages will not help you because
Yeah.
they're pretty much just nonsense words.
Yeah.
But in order to get through this, you have to say, you can say the same word 4 times, you can say each one once, but you have to go through. And every time you say a word, a monster pops out of the sphere and you got to fight it and kill it.
Mhm.
So that part of it's, I think, boring. Like it's almost the resolution of it is
Yeah.
not all
Yeah.
that interesting. But the setup, I can only imagine you go in there for the first time and you're like, how do we get through here? What's going on? Because you have to kill 4 things before the door opens.
Yeah.
Like, so you're just kind of stuck with how do we figure out how to open the door? How do we get
Mhm.
things out of the crystal? What do the words mean? I like the mystery around that. Do I like that it basically boils down to you have to hack 4 things to
Yeah.
death? Not
Yeah.
really, but
Yeah.
that's what I like.
I agree 1,000% on that encounter. I love the setup. I love the pedestal. I love that whole, it screams classic tournament encounter, pedestal in the center of the room. What are we going to do? But like you said, the fact that the characters really just kind of have to kill 4 things. And I could see players after summoning one creature not being terribly excited to read another word right away and summon another one. And I could see them kind of wasting a lot of time fooling around the pedestal. Um, so yeah, I wish it went. I think that's why I didn't put it on my list. I wish it went somewhere else with the pedestal. It's
Yeah.
like we got half of a good room. We got a great setup in a way, but then it's like a good setup to a joke, but I don't like the punchline.
Right, right. You're like, or the setup is great, and then the punchline is like, ha ha.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
yeah,
So yeah, I think, plus this room felt to me very similar to the room where the characters, certain square, there was a room with certain squares would just summon kind of creatures depending on what square the characters walked on.
yeah,
And the 2 rooms felt very similar. And since there's, absolutely the potential that the characters will go through both areas, uh it just felt kind of redundant having both
yeah,
in here. Either one by itself would have been fine, but the combination of 2 on the same level in the same dungeon just felt kind of like very same to me.
yeah. And
um
especially because the other one, I think it's Area 5, and it comes before this, and it's
yeah,
like, okay, I'd rather have the cool setup than the just straight up and monsters appear on squares.
right. So
Yeah,
that's what I mean. The poor players have already kind of gone through that, where they're kind of like, oh, we walked in here and these creatures appeared, and now we say these words and these creatures appear, and it's kind of, it's just too samey for me to really get excited about it. All right, let's see. My number 5, and again with my caveat,
mm,
is Area 8, the illusory ball. I like the way they kind of handled delusions in the old days. There was, to me, a little more thought given. Illusions seem to be taken more seriously now. I don't know, illusions and illusionists just don't seem to be as big a part of the game as they used to be.
Okay.
For me, or at least it
Yeah.
feels like that. Maybe it's the preference of my players. But I like the way this is handled. Again, it boils down to just this kind of illusion of a rolling, Indiana style, Jones style ball. But I like the way that it's handled, the description and how it's the nuts and bolts, the disbelief, how if you see somebody and it looks like they get smushed by this rolling ball, but if that particular victim who you think got killed then touches you, it sort of snaps your disbelief of the illusion. I like that element, so I guess I like the way it was handled. As
Yeah.
much as I like the illusion itself, I like the way you can disbelieve and the way that's all very well described, I think.
And that's a very good point, I think. And you're right. Is there's and in more modern modules and even other classic modules, you do not see a lot done with what you can do with an illusion.
Yeah.
And I like that this isn't necessarily something that's dangerous, but
Mm-hmm.
again, getting back to the overarching theme, I think we're going to be keep hitting on from room to room here. Quite honestly, I think it catches the players off guard
Yeah.
of what is going on. We have what is happening, and especially this one, especially set up early on. The fact that it's illusion here,
Yeah.
I think helps set up like later on. Is that an illusion?
Mhm.
What's going on? But that
Yeah.
I always think that's key if you're trying to keep players and their characters off balance.
Mm-hmm.
A encounter like this early on can throw people off their game later because now they're not sure what they're actually seeing.
Yeah, like you said earlier, it kind of causes that paranoia, and I honestly I think the variation is necessary too, because one of the reasons in my mind that this module is so deadly is there's a whole lot of combat in this. I mean, you're fighting creature after creature after creature in this thing.
Yeah.
Every level of this tower, you're fighting something. It's literally almost impossible to get through any major level of this thing without having a few fights. So just to kind of get people off of having a combat in almost every room, I think it was really necessary to throw something else at them.
Yeah.
So why not something that could at least scare the players a little bit? Yeah,
Yeah.
throw
Yeah.
them off their game. So anyway, that's my number 5 is Area 8, the illusory ball.
Yeah. Okay. So my number 4 is Area 6, the Bugbear Room. And again, it's just kind of weird. You show up in this room, and there's a total of 16 bugbears just in suspended animation sitting there. And one of the things I like is, again, if you just go up to the doorway or the entrance to this room, you can see what's going on. It does make it very clear that going through the door is what will activate some of them. So if you try all your tricks of you try to fly, you try to levitate, you're still setting off bugbears. And the thing that I think is neat is each time you go through the doorway, 4 get activated. So it's
Yeah.
not all of them, but you have to keep going in and out of this room. You're going to keep activating more.
Mm-hmm.
And it does do the Gygax thing, because I read through it at first. I was like, why don't you just throw a lightning bolt in here and blast them all? It's like, okay, they don't take any damage
Yeah.
until they are animated. So you can't cloud kill them. You can't do like it's a standard like area effect to take them out. And there's a sarcophagus at the end of the room that you really need to get to before passing on to the next room. Again, I kind of like the setup of it more than anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, it boils down to you got to kill bugbears.
Yeah.
Okay. And that
again,
part
like
isn't
you said,
terribly interesting.
Yeah.
But the whole setup is like,
right.
Wait, what are they? How do we deal with this?
Yeah.
And then I do like the fact that Alan Hammock mentions, oh, if you want to teleport to the other door and you figure out that this is bad, go ahead. To me, I look at, you're going to blow a teleport spell on that. That's
right.
Nuts, but go ahead.
But it's just like you said, this feels like to me another room with a setup and a bad punchline, in that you're given this dangerous area. You kind of, maybe after a while, after 1 or 2 people walk through the door, you probably get a clue what's going to happen. but I don't think there's really any way to prevent these guys from showing up, is there? I mean, every time somebody walks through, one way or the other, these
No.
guys are showing up.
And
So
I would say the
I
designer
wish
in
there
me, yeah,
was. I wish if you got,
yes,
I wish if you read something on the sarcophagus, or if one person got to the sarcophagus, there would be a clue there that you could do something that would deactivate the room, or that would keep the remaining frozen bugbears in stasis, or
yeah,
I mean, that would be the good punchline to
yeah.
the setup.
Well, and then to me, like there's almost like a two-part thing here of ideally the designer in me says you find half the riddle outside the room
Mhm.
and it doesn't make sense. And if you piece it together with what you read on the sarcophagus or
Yes, yeah,
something, then
yeah,
it's like, okay, you can skate through here with just fighting the chieftain, or you
yeah,
can skate
yeah,
through with just this. Again,
yeah. That would be great if you had
yeah,
a two-part, because kind of what you read in the sarcophagus, and I'm going by memory, is really kind of just telling you what's going on. It's not really
it's an
a s-
explanation, exactly.
yeah, it's not like a solution. It's kind of telling you what you're already seeing happening.
Well, you get one of the
And
keys as well in there, but which
well, that's
is
true.
critical.
That's true.
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to get to the but yeah, I wish the sarcophagus somehow, there was some way there, like you said, where you could put together, since you've got writing on the sarcophagus, I wish it had more meaning to it. I wish it,
Yeah.
provided a clue or a way to minimize the danger in this room, or gave a clue about something that was coming up in an upcoming room. To me, that would be like then bringing it to that next level.
Yeah.
All right, so let's see, where am I at? Number four. My number four, and this is more, I guess, more the gimmick than the encounter room itself, is Area 15, the central room. I just like the whole kind of four-door concept. I like the idea of the keys. I like the idea of building the keys and having to put them in the thing. We have that great Rosloff image of the guy kind of looking at the keyhole.
Yep.
Um, we saw this sort of treatment show its way up in a few other modules, like Lost Caverns of Tsojent had this sort of thing going on, a little, not exactly the same thing, but something kind of similar on one of the levels of Lost Caverns. So later on, it showed up in some other classic modules. So I like that idea of, getting a couple pieces and having to rendezvous at this central location to unlock something that's really very central
Yeah.
to the module. Because there's a potential here that some players could go through here and kind of blow through the ruins and not even get to the ghost tower, and not even sort of, get themselves to the time period of the ghost tower.
Right.
So it has to be something important that gets them there. So I like that element. I think this kind of this four-door thing is a cool thing. I like
Yeah.
that idea.
Yeah,
So that's my
and I
number
kind of like
four.
and I kind of like the mini quest narrative of it all. Of you got to
Mhm.
do all the stuff to get the keys, and then the
Yeah.
real
And then the
now we're
real,
cooking with
the
gas.
quest before, the quest just to get to the tower,
Yeah.
to get to the title tower. So yeah, that's my number four.
Okay. My number three is Area 13, the chess room,
Mhm.
which anybody who's actually read some of the stuff of Goodman games, if you have hated and despised my chess challenges, this is where it all started. And also my players of campaigns for many, many years must hate chess challenges from me, because I always manage to like sneak one in like every third dungeon or so.
Mhm.
This is, I think, really an interesting encounter. Again, they have whole things of if you fly over the board, great, nothing happens. You can go through. Like there are
Yeah.
ways around. To speak to our earlier point or the earlier
Mhm.
question, this has ways around the chess board problem.
Mhm.
Because my honest problem with it is it's almost a little too dirty, this challenge, because it makes all the white colors, like white squares on a chessboard, or like yellow and
Yeah.
different
Yeah.
colors. So it may not be what you're thinking.
Mhm.
And I just honestly, it's like, what if you don't know chess? Like
Mhm.
it doesn't explain that. I mean, you could run across the room and come back because you want to get the I believe it's you want to go to the statue at the other end who has you want to go to the statue on the other, reach the statue and come back. But if
Right.
you go out of order, you take 5 points of damage.
Mhm.
And Lembu, who is like their pre-gen fighter, has 70 hit points. Even he, if he just runs straight across and straight back, he's getting toasted.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
And forget about your magic user or your monk. They're history.
Yeah, they're.
But I like, just again, concept wise, if you can figure that out, and if I were DMing this, I would probably try to really stress the flavor text doesn't. The chess aspect of it a little more than they do.
Yeah.
So you start thinking in that way of, oh, it's like a chess game, because that's actually my big problem with this encounter.
The mention of the different colors on the floor could really throw players off the track.
Gray, blue, and green. Like I would have,
because players might start just looking for patterns in the colors as opposed to any relation to chess whatsoever. So that's really kind of very, almost like you said, it almost dirty level sneaky. You know, without that aspect, I think it's a great straight up puzzle. That makes it that enters it solidly into the devious area. You know,
like if I was running it, they describe him as a man wearing a crown. I would flat out call him a king, and maybe say, if I were doing it, there's a statue of a queen next to him, or something like that, and just kind of, you know, make it I think this is actually a little shoot. Some people are going to figure it out in 10 seconds. You always have those in every group. But I think it's a little too tough. But again, if you can once you get onto like the chess piece aspect of it, I think it's great. I think it's an interesting puzzle.
No, absolutely. Solid room. What do I have for my number 3? Again, I'm ashamed to say I'm falling down to creatures here a little bit. I love the whole sea area because it's so insane, but the area 31, I'm just giving it a shout out because of the use of the Ixtlilxochitl. Hopefully I pronounced that right.
Close enough.
Another creature that didn't get a lot of love, I think, you know, and show up in as many modules outside of Wandering Monster tables as they probably should have. So I love the fact that they're in here. And I love the fact too that there's this sort of, again, there's like deception in that there's this, and I'm looking at the whole area as a whole, there's this island there that to me as a player, I would be heading for that island instantly. And instead the island's got nothing to do with getting to the next area. You actually have to go to this, you know, coral reef or whatever and kind of go diving down and find this hatch. And it's very misleading. So it's a sort of tricky area with a creature that's not used too much. So it's an easy grab, but that's my number 3, is just sort of the hatchway with these vampiric, you know, manta guys, because I like the creature selection, like the Umbrella and the Medusa. I think it's a cool use of a creature we don't get to see a whole lot. So yeah,
that's actually, and it's just, I mentioned in our before our broadcast started to you when we're doing our green room. I had a cheat. This is one of them because, quite honestly, this is my number 2, and I'm taking it as a whole, and this for many reasons. One,
so the whole sea area, the whole
sea area is the we have a really cool monster, the Ixtlilxochitl. Again, hope I pronounced that right.
You say it better than I say it.
I just say it with confidence. I don't know if I'm saying it right.
At least you got it out in one breath. I'll give you that.
But I think, and one of the main, apart from it, it's a really cool underused monster, and there's a lot going on here. This is one of the original first edition modules I saw where it does interconnect encounters. Like you do have things of the hatchway, all right, or even just like the coral reef. If the players are hurt, the Ixtlilxochitl will come out and attack. Otherwise, it's kind of lying in wait. So you kind of have these combos in here, which I hadn't. Usually, you're just thinking, you know, like keep on the borderlands. Okay, the kobolds all stay here, the goblins all stay here, but there's no real interaction like specified. And this one, it's like, oh, you have like 2 or 3 areas that are dependent on each other. Of what the players do in one will inform what happens in another, or like I said, the Ixtlilxochitl will come out and come into another area, which I find interesting. It's like, okay, it'll leave area 32 and go to 31. It'll leave certain areas. And I find that was like kind of eye-opening to me. Even the first time I read through it, it's like, oh, okay, yes, hey, monsters can leave the
Mhm.
area they're supposed to be in and interact with the rest of the module.
Especially
And
in a tournament module,
right,
the
right.
fact that they would do that is very unusual. So,
Yeah, for like I said, I mean, it is obvious, but if when you've been thinking about just things as like isolated encounters, to see it all of a sudden be very interactive, I thought was great.
mhm. I agree. I agree. So where are we at now?
You're number two.
Okay. All right. So yeah. All right. So my number two is ta-da, Area 13. We have a crossover. We need a little
All
bell
right.
ring. The chess room. I had, of course, mentioned the chess room.
Okay.
For a lot of the reasons you mentioned, and I think it's worth noting too, at the point when this kind of was done, again, 1980, now the idea of a chess puzzle room, in a dungeon, or we've seen it done in movies like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's
Yep.
Stone and different, popular, you know, culture things. It wasn't as popular culture back then. It wasn't as routine. I think now the idea of a chess, you might think of a chess puzzle when you run into a checkered floor, but I think when this came out, that wasn't kind of the first thing that come to mind. And like we discussed, they were very devious about covering that up, almost a little too devious.
Yeah.
But that all said, to put it in terms we've been using all night, at least this joke I felt like had a good punchline. You had a
Yeah.
good setup and you had a good kind of solution. So the whole package is in there in this room. So I think this is absolutely, to me, one of the best puzzle rooms in the whole place. I like the map. I like the way it works. I can see players once they figure it out and the light dawns, really kind of feeling smart, feeling like, hey, we get it.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's key to it too. I mean, when we talk about like a punchline, part of it is, and even before that, you talked about the memories you get from making these modules.
Mhm.
Killing that room of bugbears is kind of like, yeah, we killed some bugbears.
Yeah.
Yay. Like, and that's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
If you've solved this one, you're feeling pretty darn good about
Yeah.
yourself of like, that was tricky, but we figured it out. So
Yeah.
I think there's a payoff to that
Yeah.
puzzle that doesn't exist in some of the other ones.
Yeah. And those payoffs are important, because again, as I get older, and this is just being an older geek, I guess, but it's harder to get, as you well know, it's harder to get people together. People have, start having
Yeah.
families and spouses and all kids and all this stuff. And it's like delegating peace between nations, getting all your friends in one place. It's not like when you were 12 years old. And more and more, just fighting the goblins on the road isn't enough. I look for something that's more memorable. Like even in my own campaigns now, I'm really trying to throw a lot of the classic creatures. There's so many classic creatures like, beholders and things that the players know about, but have never encountered as players, but they've
Right.
encountered orcs and goblins a million times. So like one of my private resolutions is to start bringing in some of these classic creatures, that like Umberhulks, like things
Yeah.
that the players have not fought a lot, to make those memories. And like you said, it's a good memory room. So I think it scratches that itch really well. So yeah, agreed, man.
All right.
So I think you're down to your number one.
My number one.
Drum
And my
roll.
number one, I deliberately took the soul gem area and set it aside. I'm not going to count
Yeah,
that in
which
my
I did
counters.
I did as well. So
Yeah. Which I
that
mean,
would be too easy, way too easy.
that's way too easy.
Yeah.
So, kind of in the similar vein to, I just kind of took the water level.
Uh-huh.
My number one is the fire level.
Mm-hmm.
It is bonkers. Like there is just no other way to describe that to me. You have reverse gravity. I mean, come on. You have reverse gravity in this place. There's fake stairs designed to fake you out and have players run over there and get trapped.
Which is
You have
just so cruel.
that's so mean. I
So
love it.
again, deception, paranoia.
Yeah. The evil DM in me loves that of you're gonna run over to the stairs, and even says it's like obscured by mists or something. And it's like,
Yeah.
oh my God. So it's kind of even hard to detect what's going on. And it's not an illusion. It's just like that's the way it looks.
Yeah.
You have the fire bats, which we talked about.
Right.
And then you have this super nasty fire giant who's basically a howitzer, like
Just
throwing rocks
hurling
at people.
rocks.
And he is not going to you. If you want to take him out, you got to go to him.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like your fight, especially like I looked at the map and I looked at that. I'm like, your fighter's the best person if you're using the pre-gens to take him. He's got to go over there and get him and
Yeah.
pretty much avoid a whole bunch of rocks being thrown his
Yeah.
way. It's a crazy encounter. I mean, I
Yeah.
love it.
Yeah.
And again, getting to the water encounter, it all interacts.
Yeah.
There's a whole
Yeah.
bunch of things that are dependent on each other. Of the fire giant's going to look and see what you're doing. If you deal here, then he'll actually move. Otherwise, he might move over here and throw the rocks at you.
Yeah.
Or I think it's great.
Well, for my number one, don't shoot us, folks. Area 24, the fire level reverse gravity area, because it's just absolutely insane. I can't even use the adjective I want to use on the air. It's blank insane. Because it's crazy. It's, you're on a sea of fire. There are these little skinny paths that you have to traverse this sea of fire in certain areas. You've got fire bats coming and hitting you for damage. You've got, this fire giant hurling these boulders at you, and he knows, unlike you, he knows about the reverse gravity area. Like you said, you've got the kind of deceptive area where you think you have to go up. You naturally assume, hey, I got to go to the other end of the room. I got to go to the other side where he is, beat him, and he guards the stairs, kind of thing. And no, and then, like you said, the interaction, which again is growing on me now that I'm older, the fact that you step into this area and then you fall up into this upside down water area, which is just, again, completely bonkers.
Yeah,
but very, very cool. Talk about making memories. And then you're swimming for, literally, you could be drowning in a minute, going from a fire area to, I got to get this heavy armor off because I'm drowning.
right.
What's not to like? So again, if you're looking for realism, forget about it. But if you're looking for whacked out magical effects and something that your players are not even going to know from minute to minute what they're going to be facing next, it's such an exciting area. It is the absolute, to me, that's one of the areas that I remembered from all these years from this module that, like, I will never forget, because I've experienced it as a player. I've experienced it DMing people through it. So yeah, it's that is a memory maker. So that's my number one. My unabashed number one is the fire level.
I almost would have been disappointed if it wasn't, because like I said, it's just,
I didn't know. I figured we'd cross over in the chess room. I figured the chess room was a no-brainer. I didn't know about I figured it would be in there somewhere, but I didn't think it would be your number one. So
no, like I said, it's just crazy, and you have to accept that it is. But it's crazy in a fun way. And we've been talking about some of these other encounters of, like, there's things we like, but it just doesn't stick the landing. And it's like, this one, no pun intended, fires on all cylinders.
You can't, you're right. You can't ask for more missiles on this one. That's for sure.
I know.
So good way to end with a nice solid number one overlap. So where we're getting down on time, let's see. Real quick, folks, as always, we want to thank you for, just joining a couple dudes here discussing the games we love. We're so glad you could join us. If you like what you see, give us a like, give us a follow. If you're watching us later on YouTube, please ring that bell and subscribe. It helps us. Please keep those comments coming both during the show and after. If you're watching on the video, you can post comments underneath. We read them all. Our next show is coming on July 3rd, usual bat time. We are going to be talking about classics. U1, The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. Chris Doyle, as much fun as I had with Mike tonight, Chris Doyle will be returning in 3 weeks. I think he would throw me into the Goodman dungeons if I ever did Saltmarsh without him. So we will be talking about The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. And hey, maybe we'll do the whole Saltmarsh series in 3 shows if people want that. Maybe we'll just boom, boom, boom. We'll go through three.
I would be all for that.
Shows. Yeah. If we can work it out, maybe I'll talk to Chris. Maybe we'll do that. But yeah, that is our next show coming up. Mike, I absolutely want to thank you for joining me and co-hosting. This
My pleasure.
Now, I think last on our agenda is our Pearl of Wisdom. Did you want to go first, or did you want me to go first?
I can go first if you want.
Go for it.
It kind of ties into the question that we got earlier, which is puzzles, which I think this is a one of the things this module is known for. It's something I in particular like putting into mine. My pearl of wisdom is this, and I've had this, is you'll work out this very complicated or very intricate puzzle, and you watch your players at the table and how they're trying to solve it. And I've always been, they don't have to solve it the way you wrote it.
Mm-hmm.
I have listened to my players put together a perfectly sound, logical solution for a
Mm-hmm.
puzzle that is nowhere near what I had written down or dreamed
Mm-hmm.
up. I roll with it.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
their solution makes sense, if like if
Yeah.
it's a riddle, round she is, it flat as a board, that whole thing from like White Plume Mountain, and you come up and you're like, well, I think this, therefore this must be the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, DM screen behind the DM screen, I know you didn't do my answer, but
Yeah.
you gave a good answer. And
Yeah.
I think that's
Yeah.
like a key to helping players, one, have fun because they feel
Mm-hmm.
like they accomplished something. They solved the puzzle. They did, but they're not dependent on solving it your way or
Yes.
solving
And
it the module's way.
and that's it. It's, at the end of the day, it's not, I think, about sticking to a script as much as, again, it's about having good memories. I mean,
Yep.
when you mention that, it brings to mind a story that about the original Tomb of Horrors tournament, because we mentioned Tomb of Horrors earlier.
Mm.
That I remember reading about how one of the groups, there was one area in the Tomb of Horrors that people may remember. There's a throne room where there's a scepter and it's got a gold end and a silver end. And I can't remember which is which, but basically one of the ends was a really deadly end. And if you touched a player with one end of it, they would turn to powder or snuff them out. And the conceit in that room is there was a crown that you would put on your head and it would basically fix itself to your head. And if you touched one end of the scepter to the crown, you could take the crown off. If you touched the wrong end of the scepter, the player was turned into dust, vaporized initially. And I remember reading how, in the very, again, before you and I ever saw the Tomb of Horrors in the initial tournament, one of the players, after seeing a player get snuffed out by doing just that, basically carried this thing along all the way to the final room. And when the Lich Skull appeared, he said, I'm going to touch the bad end of the scepter to the skull. And, supposedly, as the story goes, Gygax kind of looked at the other judge, and the judge looked at him and they kind of shrugged their shoulders and said, we didn't think of that. Okay. And that group emerged victorious and basically blasted the Demi-Lich to smithereens because Gygax could think of no good reason to say no. Sometimes the players will think of stuff that you don't think about. So yeah, man, I agree.
That's great.
So, and I love that story. So, all right, my pearl of wisdom real quick, kind of generalized pearl of wisdom here this week is, I guess for, again, for the DMs, is don't be afraid to be inspired by that which you don't like. And by that, I mean, like, I've been unabashed in that I'm not always a fan of Funhouse modules, almost to the point where I have to catch myself these days because I get into that feeling of module design where I'm putting in the barracks and I'm putting in the living quarters, the necessary stuff.
How do they eat? How do they?
Right. I'm so busy thinking
themselves?
The ecology that sometimes I forget to put enough tricks in there, or enough puzzles in there, or enough things that really make those fun experiences. And I'm learning to break myself out of that way of thinking. And I would encourage other DMs to do that. So many people will flatly say they don't like that kind of module, or they don't like a particular module. Like, again, to mention the Tomb of Horrors. Many people don't like the Tomb of Horrors, period. They hate it. It's a killer module. Can't stand it. But even if you don't like killer modules, or you don't like the Tomb of Horrors because of the way it's written, or because it's so tough, or whatever, certainly there's inspiration there. There's so many good tricks and so many good traps and so many things like the Hall of Spheres, or these different areas in that, or the four-armed gargoyle, that are just really cool kind of areas, despite how deadly they may or may not be, that there's inspiration to be gained. You could take them and modify them, or take them as inspiration and run with them. And that's my pearl of wisdom, is to every module, everything, whether it's your style or not, there's something to find in there, especially when you take old things like this and reread them afresh, just rereading this for the show. I always take these, kind of go through them again, no matter how good I think my memory is, I found stuff in this, rereading this module for the show tonight, that now has me thinking, for some stuff on a project I'm working on right now. So it's there's inspiration, I think, to be taken there. So that's my pearl of wisdom. Real simple
Yeah,
perhaps, but that's my pearl of wisdom for tonight.
yeah, and just to riff on that, it's like, if you have like I do, like a pile of modules that you haven't read in a while, sometimes it's
Mhm.
good to even read the ones you don't like, or you're
Yeah,
like, oh
yeah.
yeah, because I don't necessarily think your opinion's going to change. I reread one. If you do a show on this, I'm not watching it. Curse of Xanathon. I
Mhm.
just don't like the module.
Correct. Yeah.
I just, it's just not to me. There's a lot of, I'm not going to go into, but I reread it recently. I was like, did I really dislike it this much? And I'm like,
Mhm.
I still don't like it. But again, I picked out like two or three things. I was like, oh, that was a cool encounter.
Yeah.
Oh, that's a neat thing.
Yeah.
And you just kind of file that away. Of just because I didn't like the module doesn't mean
Mhm.
there aren't like little nuggets of gold in there
Yeah.
somewhere that
Yeah.
you can just mine out
Yeah.
and figure out, okay, I can use that elsewhere in something I do like.
Yeah. Yeah. So you got to mine for those nuggets.
Yeah.
So I think that brings us to the end of the
Mm.
show. We're at the top of the hour. So yeah, we will rejoin you next time, folks, in 3 weeks. Again, Mike, thank you for joining me,
Thank you
and
for having me.
good night.
Genuine pleasure.
Oh yeah, no, pleasure on both sides. Good night, folks.
Good night.